Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Ekman of Gold Derby, and here with me is the writer and star of Ain't No Mo, Jordan E. Cooper. This play has it already has a pretty bold premise with all Black Americans basically being offered a flight out of the country, but it also is very intriguing because it really asks the audience to kind of almost like be in a dialogue. It is in your face. What was it that really made you sit down and write this kind of play?
Yeah, it really started from, specifically the summer of 2016, where Philando Castile and Alton Sterling got murdered within a week of each other. It's always when it rains, it pours kind of vibe, right? And I was just drowning in the pour. And I'm one of those people who I always have to find something to laugh about. I have a very dark sense of humor. I always tell people, like, I'm the guy at a funeral, like, why is she wearing a bra? She's going 6 feet under. Why is her wig crooked? Somebody could have at least gave her a nice little lace, a nice 22 inches before we laid her in a casket. And I just always have to find, that light. And in that moment, the light was, what if we just all said F it? Like, what if we just all said, we're getting on a plane, we're not dealing with injustice anymore, we're not dealing with racism anymore, we're not dealing with economic inequality anymore. We're just gonna go. And that's really where it started from. And then the first scene that came to me was that church scene, that acts like almost like I call it the Book of Revelations. Like it's almost like this pastor is seeing the future at the end of the play. But at the top, everybody thinks that everything's going to be perfect because there's a Black president. And then we flash forward to the present day, or rather the futures, I like to say, and we see that that's not the case.
I was wondering about the different scenes because this play, it is broken up into these different segments. Did any of those kind of feel like they were going to break off and be their own play at one point, or was it always to tell this particular story?
No, it was always to tell this story. There was something really interesting to me about, like, seeing all these different people across the country deal with the exact same issue, and see how they all get that same email saying that there's a free ticket to go to Africa. And if you don't go, you turn into a privileged white man. And see all these different people react to this idea of freedom, this idea of leaving and finding something better than what this country offers. There was something interesting about seeing all different types of people all over the country and really examining the mosaic of Blackness and queerness, and how we respond to our daily lives.
And when I was trying to describe this to people, and I was like, you have to go see this show, I kind of realized I couldn't really compare your style to another like major Broadway playwright. Are there playwrights or other writers that you kind of take inspiration from? How do you
Oh,
describe your style?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of like a pot of gumbo of all my favorites. I love well, I always say Stephen Sondheim is like, even though people go, he's a composer, but I always call him one of my favorite playwrights because each of those plays are, you can't tell me they're not three-act plays, those songs. And August Wilson and Tyler Perry even and Katori Hall and George C. Wolfe in the Code Museum and Douglas Turner Ward and the Day of Absence. I feel like I'm kind of like a agglomeration of all these different people because where Michael Jack that quote that I remember, I don't know who said it, but it was in that Michael Jackson book that I read when I was younger because I used to be obsessed with Michael Jackson when I was a little kid. But it was like study the greats and become even greater, and that always stuck with me as a little kid. This idea that, like, it's almost like a revolving door. We're all here to pour out our best of our best, and for somebody else to pick it up and make something new with it. And that's what I hope to do as well as an artist, is to pour out my best and somebody gets inspired.
Yeah. You also starred in the show as Peaches, and I'm interested, did performing your own words, did that lead to like discoveries you didn't even know were there in the piece when you actually had to bring them to life yourself?
Oh, absolutely. Peaches is a long story. I never wanted to play that role ever. It was hard enough to write that role. I remember when I first moved to New York, I had written this play, and Stevie Walker Webb, who's a really like one of my best friends, and is a director of Ain't No Mo. We were working on another play of mine, and it was probably like my junior year, sophomore year of college. He was in the MFA program at the new school, and I was in the BFA program. And it was after rehearsal one day, we were like, "Oh, let's go to Planet Fitness." We went on pizza day just to make sure, you know, we were getting our money's worth. And basically, we were working on a treadmill, and he just looked over at me. And he asked me, he's like, "Why don't you write a queer character?" I was like, what are you talking about? I would never write a queer character. I don't want to write a queer character. Me and my internalized homophobia being from the South. And this idea that like, I hadn't really even dealt with my own queerness. So it was hard for me to write it. Even though I'm living it and I have all this pain and all this fury and all this comedy within that experience. And so I sat down to write, and the first queer character I ever wrote was Peaches. And I sat down and I just put the blackest and gayest version of myself on paper. And it was so freeing and it was so liberating. And I had this actor in mind that I really wanted to do it. And we did one of the first readings, and I had this actor come, and it didn't really fit him. It didn't fit his instrument. And we were out of town. We were doing a reading out of town at Dartmouth, and we had to let him go hours before the performance. And I had spent all this time kind of like workshopping it with him, like trying to like help him out. And Stevie was like, Jordan, this is your role. He was like, you spent all this time trying to teach him how to do it. He was like, nobody knows how to do it like you. Just put on a wig and go on stage. And so I did it, and it fit like a glove. And I was fighting it for so long, but the audience loved it, and it felt so good. It felt like jazz moving through my bones. And I think, yeah, the more time I spent with her as time is going on, even though the language has shifted slightly, it's like I always find something new. I always try to put on my actor hat whenever I'm approaching the work, and never try to go at it as like a playwright who's acting. I always try to like leave the playwright. And I ask myself what I meant by that. I asked, what does the playwright mean by this? Or what is it? I wonder what this means. I wonder what that beat is. And it really allows me to like investigate as an actor, and play that bitch to death. Cause she is a trip. She is a trip.
Had you ever had experience doing drag then, or was that a whole new thing for
No,
you?
I've never done drag before. I had done like, I mean, who hasn't done drag in their bathroom? Um, but I'd never done drag before. I mean, other than like when I was a little kid and I used to put on my plays, I would play all these different characters in the living room and at the church and at the rec center and all this stuff. But like I'd never done drag before. So that was a new world for me. Yeah.
Is it hard to not be like in a notes giving mode when you're on stage and you're one of the actors and you see other people doing lines? Are you sort of like, oh no,
Oh,
that's not what I meant.
oh
Say it
yeah,
like this.
yeah. No, for sure. I mean, I'm always giving notes, even to myself. But what the privilege was with A No Mo was that we had such an extensive time in the room working everything out, and some people had been with it since the workshop, like Crystal and Fedna had been with the play since the very first workshop at the public, and Ebony's been with it since the very first reading. Ebony Marshall Oliver, I've known her since I was 14 years old. So they kind of knew a lot of what the intention of the thing was. But what was so fascinating about coming back after a pandemic, after we did the public production, was being able to break it open and find some more new and cool stuff. And I rewrote some stuff and I tweaked some stuff and I played with things. So it felt like a fresh batch of water.
Excuse me. I think one of my favorite parts from Peaches is that scene where she's trying to get Miss Bag on the
Mm,
plane,
mm.
and it just really spirals. I mean, you end up, de-dragging, and it's incredibly powerful. Can you just talk about what that moment is to you?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. That final scene is it's a mountain to climb. And what I love about that is that every time I would leave stage, like the first few previews, I would always have a new scar out of nowhere. Like I would just be bleeding, and I'd be like, "What happened?" And it's just literally the fight with Miss Bag. The fight with Miss Bag. Um, but that moment really is this idea that Miss Bag is the carrier of all this history and everything that Black people have contributed to America. So the idea that Peaches, who's really the only real queer character in the play, is the one who's helped everybody get on board to this flight. And no one really stopped to be like, hey, what about that person? And the idea that she's left alone and in charge and pulling all of this culture and all of this pain and all this blood and all these bones onto the plane by herself. And Miss Bag is putting up a fight because Miss Bag is like, this is my home. This is my story. This is my testimony. I can't go find easy with you guys.
Mm.
I have to stay here and fight for what belongs. And while she's touching that bag, it's almost like a possession. Like all this history and all these stories come up in that final monologue that she has, which is really a marathon of a monologue to get out every night. Um, but in that moment, it's one of the Peaches, that character in that final scene is feeling some of the lowest uh, pain that any human being could ever feel in that moment. And the idea that she's, because she's forgotten and because she's the only one alone and nobody's there to help her fight, this idea that we need each other, we need community in order to fight for a thing. And she's just, stripped of everything that belongs to her, her identity, her blackness, her queerness, her joy, her triumph, her victory. Everything gets stripped because she has no community in that moment.
And I think this show, as we saw, like raised a lot of conversation around, like what types of theater are on Broadway and who is this aimed at? Can it be broader? Because it's not a type of play that we normally see on a Broadway stage. What was your experience like within that?
It was every emotion you could feel. I've always been like such a Broadway kid. Like I've been a Broadway nerd watching the Tony Awards since I was like 8 years old, just being obsessed. And so I've always admired the art form. I've always admired the industry. I never thought that would be the play to go to Broadway. But it really was a matter of why not, you know this idea that Broadway doesn't have to be one thing, and I think that if we learned anything before the pandemic or during the pandemic, it's that Broadway has to shift and it has to change and it has to move differently, and the accessibility has to be different and the audience has to look a little different. And I think what was interesting was that it seemed like once we got back from the pandemic, everything was kind of the same, you know. And here comes Ain't No Mo, which is the complete opposite of what Broadway usually stands for. But what was so beautiful was the way that community showed up for it, in the way that, that call to action of being like, no, if this is the type of work that we say that we want on Broadway, and we say we want these stories to be told, so we really have to show up for them and we really have to support them. And this was a show that, it needed time to find its footing because it wasn't based on any IP, it wasn't like an adaptation of anything, there were no celebrities, but I really do think that it represents everything that Broadway should and could be, especially for the Black community. A lot of us, even though we've always been on Broadway since the inception of Broadway, a lot of people within the Black community don't always feel welcome or accepted as a part of the audience, because one, they don't always see themselves, or if they do see themselves, they don't see their stories, and if they do see their stories, they're usually policed in the audience. I've been to so many shows where I have an audible reaction to something. I'd be like, "Go ahead, yeah, that's it," and then all of a sudden, all these people turn around and look at me like I lost my damn mind. And it's like, no, this is how we respond. And what's so beautiful about Animo is that it's necessary to have those kind of reactions in that play. It's necessary to take up that much space in that play. And I think that the more we really expand what we think Broadway is or what we think commercial theater can be, I think that our audiences will start to look a lot more like the real world and the world that we live in. And I think that Ain't No Mo was literally just the tip of the iceberg of the works and the conversations that have to be had in the industry.
Yeah. And this play, you guys, you sadly got a closing notice, but you basically decided no. And you launched this whole Save the Show campaign, which, I mean, we've in the past, we've seen people try to do this for certain things and it very rarely works out, but you really had people rally, buying out performances. It was incredible to watch. What did it feel like being on the inside of that moment?
Oh, it was so many feelings. So many feelings. What's crazy is I got the closing notice. Debbie Allen sent me these beautiful, gorgeous flowers because I worked with her on my show, the Miss Pat Show, and she sent me these gorgeous flowers. And I got the closing notice while looking at these very much alive flowers that I got on opening night. And it's one thing. This is what I said. It's one thing if you're a playwright and you get served for the closing notice and you're like, we've exhausted every resource. We've had the best marketing. We've done everything we possibly can, and it just doesn't work. Then I'm like, okay, it was just a great play, and it didn't catch on, and that's it. But when you're served with a closing notice, and you know that you haven't been given every resource, and you haven't had every opportunity, you haven't had time to find your audience. It is absolutely not. It's absolutely not. It's like we have work to do because this is a prime example of the works that should be here, and we have to fight for them. And the Save Ain't No Mo campaign was something that I had never seen before, in terms of how community just rallied around commercial theater. Everyone from Will Smith to Jada Pinkett Smith to Shonda Rhimes to Tyler Perry to Sada Ramirez to Gabrielle Union and Dwayne Wade doing things and buying out houses, all the way down to people who live in Iowa buying tickets for complete strangers on social media. People were sponsoring people in ways that I'd never seen before, and that in itself is community. And the fact that it happened with Ain't No Mo, and it happened with this play, it's unlike anything I've ever seen and I've ever experienced. And it was a roller coaster of emotions. It was a roller coaster of emotions. It was a while. I don't think I slept. I don't think I slept. There were a lot of phone calls being made. There was a lot of posting and interviews and press and really just pushing the story out there, as to why this is a play that really deserves to live and deserves to be seen, and it represents exactly what Broadway should look like. Yeah, it was something special. It was something special.
It certainly was. We're glad it's here, that it had a life, and that it certainly made an impact. So thank you, Jordan, for talking with me about it. For everyone watching, make sure you subscribe to Gold Derby. Stay with us this season. Jordan, thank you again. It's a pleasure.
Thank you. Appreciate it.